Hi there, and welcome along to the Gersnet Podcast, the totally free and independent Rangers podcast where the content is made by the fans for the fans and where everything is always 100% free. And as you know by now, it's not just the podcast that we have here at Gersnet, but if you head over to the website at www.gersnet.co.uk, you can catch up with all the great content, including match previews, reviews, articles, history archives, and the very, very friendly discussion forum. It's another wee Friday night preview show that we have for you here at Gersnet. We're going to be looking ahead to the Kilmarnock game tomorrow and touching on a couple of other wee issues as well, such as the continuing disciplinary farce in Scottish football and the ongoing tax case that we have as well surrounding Rangers and Scottish football at the moment. So there's plenty to discuss. My name's Ross Bennett. I'm going to be your host this evening, and as you can tell, the cameras are on. We are delighted to be joined by fans' favourite John McCallum. John, it's been a while actually since you and I were last on a show together, so it's a pleasure to see you again.
I'm well. I think they just keep us apart, Ross. I think too much of a good thing.
Exactly, but I've been looking ahead to the schedule and see that we're back on together on Sunday. So
yes. I told my wife earlier that. Oh, by the way, I'm doing a football podcast on Valentine's night. And she's all right. So you might as well just carry on doing one tonight then, because your weekend's ruined already.
That's it. Fast track to divorce. It's as you say, John, it's a pleasure to have you back on. And there's quite a lot to discuss for us tonight. Obviously, we'll go ahead and we'll look at the Kilmarnock game in a wee moment. But it's been quite the week for Scottish football. What I do want to kind of say straight off the bat is that, obviously we acknowledge this has been quite a momentous week in terms of the report that's come out around historic child sex abuse in football. We're going to sort of let the dust settle on that a wee bit and maybe come to that in a few days' time. But what I would say is that there's some excellent stuff that's been written by our very own Frankie on the Gersnet website, and a lot of stuff that I think is still to come out on this issue. So I think we're going to give that some time before we try and tackle that issue properly and sensitively. Something that we don't have to tackle sensitively, thankfully, is the disciplinary stuff in Scottish football. So I think we might as well start there, John. Kamar Roof's appeal failed. 2-game suspension is upheld for the tackle last week against Hamilton. Albion Ajeti in midweek for Celtic with his dive. He got cleared. And Rangers have consistently called for consistency in the decision-making process. First things first, are you surprised at the outcomes that we've seen throughout the course of the week?
No. I mean, I think that's the most damning thing you can say about it is I don't know any Rangers supporter that's surprised, Ross. When it was almost predicted that Roof would be called up as soon as Andy Walker and the commentator and let's be honest here, the director, the person who is actually behind that programme, to be fair to Crocker and Walker, they talk about what they're told to talk about. They don't say what's to be shown as a replay. There's a director there somewhere in Sky who's making these calls, and you knew fine well that was going to happen with Morelos, and you knew fine well when the Roof challenge went in and it was getting focused on, the same thing would happen. So it came as absolutely no surprise at all to anybody. It came as even less a surprise that the Celtic forward was let off. Although I have to say, I would have thought Celtic would have been pushing for a 2-game ban for him because I've seen him play. And I would have thought that would be in their interest to have him out that squad. But we shouldn't laugh because it is very, very annoying. But no, entirely predictable.
Yeah. I mean, so like I say, Rangers have kind of reiterated their calls for consistency this week, whether that be Gerrard in his press conferences or Rangers sending out some fairly snarky tweets. And I think it's probably clear to see why, as you say, it was no surprise, not only Kamar Roof's outcome, but Ajeti's as well. No one is kind of shocked by this. And it kind of transcends the old firm as well. There have been a number of incidents. The one that I think back to is Curtis Main at Aberdeen going in knee-high, studs up, and that's not looked at, and there's no retrospective action for that. How would you kind of sum up the disciplinary process? We know that Claire White has left the role. We haven't had a compliance officer kind of do a number of years in that role for a long time, and there's now this 3-man panel making decisions. How do you kind of sum up the general state of the disciplinary process in Scotland at the moment?
I mean, it's ironic that we've been calling for consistency because it has been consistent, but it's been consistently bad. And, that's the reality of it. They had the guy McLennan before Claire White. They had Vincent Lunny, if you remember him. Obviously Rod Mackenzie has been involved at various different stages along the way. The consistency is there for everybody to see. You just need to have a wee look. It's farcical and it's unfair. For all other, okay, if you're a supporter of Kilmarnock, if you're a supporter of Rangers and say, well, look, advantage, bigger support, more money. The supporters of these clubs be influenced by the crowd, etc. All that kind of stuff, which I suspect most Rangers supporters would take issue with. But that's how people view it. But nobody who is in any way objective could look at this just now, Ross, and say that this is fair. Consistently one team gets called out, and I've now heard people say this week that Rangers have benefited because Roof didn't get sent off, because Morelos didn't get sent off. And you think, well, hang on. Again, look at this objectively. The referees in both the cases saw what happened. There was no crowd in both those matches to in any way influence. And in both cases, they decided it wasn't a sending off. It takes 5 replays from 4 different angles before you get to the point where you think, yeah, actually, fair enough. There's one club, and I don't think of myself as being particularly paranoid Rangers supporter, but there is one club who has consistently pulled on these, and other clubs that is just ignored. And I think the most frustrating thing about the Roof one was most of us thought the referee's seen this, the referee's booked them, that nothing more can happen. That was the rule. So somewhere the rule has changed. I wasn't aware the rule had changed. I don't know if you were aware the rule had changed. I don't think Gerard was aware the rule had changed. But somewhere along the lines, the rules changed. And now, even if the ref has seen it and the ref has decided to punish the player, we can still step in later and punish more. And I don't think that's fair. I really don't think. I don't think that's fair whatever club is involved in it. No. But when it's consistently your own club, you think, I don't know. I felt this week it was the case of the Empire Strikes Back. I thought, no, the Celtic are trying to get all their wee ducks in a row just now and trying to do their best to upset us in various different ways. And I think losing Roof and Morelos for the game this weekend was the best outcome they could come up with under the circumstances. Yeah,
I think you make some really, really good points there, and you're sort of verging on to talking about re-refereeing, which obviously Gerard spoke about in his press conference and has called out, and we'll come on to that in a moment. We had Chris Jack on the show a couple of weeks ago from the Glasgow Times and the Herald Group, and we asked him the question around trial by sports scene. It's a phrase that actually as Rangers fans we quite like using, that phrase, trial by sports scene, and maybe more appropriate in this day and age is trial by Sky Sports. And I'm sure you know what I mean by that, is that anytime Alfredo Morelos so much as wipes his nose in a player's direction, that's shown 100 times, and Crocker has a comment and Walker has a comment. And it seemed very apparent to me when we played Hamilton last week that they had a lad booked within 30 seconds for going up with an arm. Was it an arm? Was it an elbow? Was he leading with it? Was it intentional? He was booked within 30 seconds and it was never commented on again. And I think I'm right in saying that he scored in the 94th minute. So, you mentioned Kamara, we benefited from having the player on the pitch. So did they. I'm not saying it should have been a red card, but would you say that if that was our player, that would have been reviewed a number of times? If that was Morelos booked within 30 seconds, how many times would he have been called? He plays on the edge and he's given his manager a decision to make and he's constantly letting his team down. Do you think that there's something in that the number of reviews, the number of replays, the number of times it's mentioned by the commentators starts to kind of infiltrate the retrospective action that these players face?
100%. 100%. Profile plays a huge part in this. And I'm not trying to be smart here. I'm not trying to be arrogant. But what was the name of the Hamilton player? And the reality is that most people who are on tonight, and most people who listen, won't remember the name of that Hamilton player. And I don't mean that to demean the guy, but the reality is that Rangers players' profile is so significantly higher than every other team in the country bar one. And because of that, you have to understand how the media works. That Morelos sells papers. Morelos is, his box office. Roof is box office, Gerrard is box office. And so they will get the attention of the media, for good or for bad. At the same time, this isn't fair. The SFA, the SPFL should be above that. Fine, if the media want to highlight things, if they want to use the names of these people to sell players and boost ratings, everyone understands that's how the game works. But the media is one thing, but the governing body should be above that. The governing body should be able to look at that and say, a player for Rangers and a player for Hamilton should be treated exactly the same. They should face exactly the same consequences for doing similar, or for being involved in similar incidents.
Yeah.
And I think we're all willing to look at the Hamilton thing and say, 50-50. Did he mean it, or was it accidental? Okay. Well, I feel the same with Roof. I look at the Roof thing, and I've looked at it a dozen times, and I look at it and I think, I don't think he meant it. He caught the boy. And I don't think he went there to hurt him. He was just trying to get ahead of the ball, get his body in the way of the ball. It was one of those things. But it wasn't a deliberate attempt to injure the guy, and it certainly wasn't a deliberate attempt I don't think he was deliberately trying to foul the boy. Morelos was. So you put your hands up and you say fair enough. But I do genuinely think that this is all to do with our profile, and I think that reflects very, very badly on the authorities, that they can't see that, no matter what your profile, the players should be treated the same way.
So I'm now at risk of getting incredibly deviated from the agenda, but I think this is such an interesting point that if it is all about profile, then why is it that, as you say, there are two clubs with pretty large profile in this country. Why is it that one's being treated from the other? Because in my opinion, they are. And I don't think that that's an overly controversial statement to make. You look at the number of retrospective reviews. I think that they cited Ajeti midweek, by the way, as a token. There's a bit of heat on us. There's a little bit of, we're under the microscope a bit in terms of our disciplinary process. Let's pull him up and let's have a wee token look. No surprise that he gets away with it. And the number of retrospective reviews on Celtic players is incredibly low. I think I'm right in saying up until a couple of weeks ago, there had never been a fast track review of a Celtic player that was upheld in terms of ending up in a suspension. So why is it that the two clubs of similar profile are treated differently?
Well, it's an interesting question. Let's look at our understanding of the statistics on this thing. Are this current Rangers team a physical team? Are they a dirty team? I don't think so. This is a Rangers team. This is probably the first Rangers team in my lifetime that hasn't had a recognised enforcer in it, if we can call it that. Most of the successful Rangers teams had two or three guys in the team that could leave the boot in if required. This Rangers team doesn't. Morelos has the reputation for being dirty, but Morelos' stuff is about protecting himself as he gets kicked up in the air by three different centre halves, all taking a different go at him. This isn't a dirty Rangers team. Could you say the same thing about our friends across the city? No, you can't. I mean, they have players in that team, Scott Brown, and don't take this as a criticism of Scott Brown. In the end, that's how he plays. He plays on the edge. He's a player who gets involved. He's a player that tries to put the opposition off their game. He's a player who will look for the opposition's playmakers and do everything he can to stop them. But let's be honest here. He gets away with just shocking against St Mirren the other night. There was games with tackling that. You think, how does he get away with it? But he's got away with it consistently for years now. And I do think part of that is Celtic are very, very critical, openly critical of the SFA and the SPFL when they feel like it. Now, cast your mind back to what seems like a long time ago when Celtic came back from Dubai, right? And so Peter Law made his sort of apology, and then Neil Lennon hadn't been seen. Neil Lennon had to go and isolate. And if you recall his first press conference when he came back, he lost it. Mm-hmm. He had a go at the Scottish government. He had a go at the SPFL. He had a go at he had a go at everybody. And to this day, I will never understand, why is he not up on a charge of bringing the game into disrepute? He lost it completely. He absolutely had a go at everybody, publicly. they are, I don't care what anyone says, you're right, they are judged to a different standard. And I do think it's because I think they have more influence in there. I think they have a malign influence in there, frankly. I think our decade of not punching our weight, has, they filled that void. And I also think that the authorities are scared of taking them on. I don't know why, but I do. I think the authorities in this country are scared to take them on, and so they don't. Rick Robert wrote in Gersnet a great article in Gersnet today. I read it today, and he pointed out that 40%, and I couldn't have told you this, but 40% of the citations have been to players playing against Celtic. Mm-hmm. So, you have to look at that and you think, really? And why is that? Why is it that's what's constantly getting pulled up? Yeah. I don't know. These are the kind of things that make us paranoid.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, I think. By the way, what I will say for anyone who's listening who kind of only knows Gersnet through the podcast, Rick Roberts' articles on Gersnet are consistently excellent and very, very much worth checking out. I think to kind of pull this one to a close, John, you mentioned the different tactic that Celtic take, that Neil Lennon's come out and is incredibly critical. And that's not the first time he's lost his head in a press conference, far from it. Gerrard today, his approach is very different. He's talking about refereeing games. It's not fair on the referees that we have. We need to do more to bring up their standards, make them full-time professional. I guess the question is, are the club doing enough? And I know that we will always have a very, very vocal section of the fan base that want a statement for this and a statement for that, and let's go to war with the SFA, and let's do it publicly. And there's merits to that, and there's drawbacks to that. But in your opinion, in a time like this, are the club doing enough?
I'm going to assume that we're looking at the Swan just now. That on the surface it seems a bit serene and gentle, and underneath that there's an awful lot of activity going on. And I'm saying that with no insight. And I say that every time I come on about these things. I don't know anything about any. I have no insights into anything. Nobody tells me anything. Everything I'm telling you is just my opinion. But I have been interested this season, and Colin and I spoke about this actually a couple of weeks ago. I have been interested this season that we have been noticeably quieter. We have been noticeably more subtle in what we've been saying than we have been in previous seasons. And I'm going to assume that is deliberate. I'm going to assume that is a decision that has been made at a fairly senior level. And I think you have to give that time to see if that brings about any change. It doesn't feel like it's brought about any change yet, by the very fact that we're talking about it. There's obviously something significant going to happen this summer when Peter Law steps down and is replaced. Customers on side rather. And so I suppose from that perspective, it makes some sense, Ross. But if you actually want to try and get things done, I think you have to make friends. You have to try and influence people from that way. And it's not worked yet, but let's see. I think you have to give it time.
I think that's a fair way to put it. And I think let's not underestimate the influence of Peter Lawwell leaving the world of Scottish football at the end of this season. That might present itself as more of an opportunity. Look, I think we've kind of gone on about this enough, and we'll certainly revisit the topic on Sunday. Before we move on, I'll just take a moment to mention one of the partners that we have here at Gersnet, which is rangerspicks.com. It's the official Rangers Pick'em game, which is free to sign up, free to use, and you could be in with a shout of winning a cash prize, which would be a share of £1,000. And it's so easy that both myself and Frankie have actually won £50 or £60 playing this game. All you have to do is sign up. It takes less than a minute to sign up. There will be a market, for example, open for tomorrow's Kilmarnock game. You just have to make 12 predictions about the game tomorrow, such as, will Ryan Kent get an assist? How many tackles will Connor Goldson make? And if you get the most questions right, you're in with a shout of winning a share of the money. Like I say, rangerspicks.com, free to sign up, but it is technically gambling, so please make sure you're over 18 and gamble aware. Now, John, your favourite topic on a Friday night, as we all know, is to talk about tax. It's a shame that we don't have Colin here, because I'm sure that the two of you could really ramble on about it. But it's been a big week, I think, in terms of the tax case and everything that's kind of going on with the review. There's been statements left, right, and centre. I know that a lot of supporters, probably much like myself, are I'm not bright enough to understand what's always going on with the tax cases, but also
it's because Ross, it's because Colin and I actually pay tax. Whereas I think are you still domiciled some tax exile place?
No, I've got a PO box now in Bermuda. It all goes there. Someone sorts that for me. But I think there's a degree of being like, look, we've been through all of this. We've been burned. We've had a horrible decade as a result of tax cases, and it makes us switch off a little bit. But I think what's happening this week is incredibly, incredibly important, and a little bit unusual as well in terms of the stuff that's come out about everything that went on 10 years ago. Could you maybe just give us a little summary of what's happened and why it's so unusual?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It is unusual because what we have just now, and as I say, I'll try and keep it short, but it is important to say at the start, this isn't really going to change anything, I don't think. We're not going to be able to go back in time and reverse some of the things that happened. But it is interesting because the Lord Advocate, who is the most senior law officer in Scotland, and Scotland, of course, has its own legal system. This person is the most senior law officer, and he's a political appointment as well. Now, he's not necessarily a politician, but he's a political appointment. And our current Lord Advocate, a chap called Lord Wolfe, had to stand up in Parliament this week and explain that one of his predecessors had been part of what they describe as a malicious prosecution. And this was a prosecution of the chaps from Duff and Phelps, White House, and the other guy whose name's gone completely in my mind. Now, for a Lord Advocate to say that about anybody, but any kind of prosecution, is very, very rare. Very, very rare. I mean, there have been miscarriages of justice in Scotland. These are things that do happen. But for him to stand up and say that this was a malicious prosecution is quite something. Now, the word malicious could be, you have to be careful about that word, because if I was to suggest that you had done something malicious, well, you would understand that was not, I was accusing you of doing something deliberate. In legal terms, the word malicious doesn't necessarily mean that. It's a slightly grey area of what that word means legally. But what it does mean is that the current Lord Advocate has accepted, and the current Chief Constable has accepted, that the prosecution of those men was done for reasons other than wholesome ones, other than the fact that they had actually believed they had committed a crime and they had evidence to prove it. He was very careful about the words he used, and I'm trying to be careful with the words I use as well, because I know you and Frankie may have won some money on the pickups. I feel it's probably not enough to cover a legal case. He was careful about the words he used. He was at pains to say there are ongoing cases. So as well as the two gentlemen from Duff and Phelps, there are some other people involved in these cases who are well known to us all, who we will all remember from the good old days of 7-8 years ago, who are currently involved in a court case with the Scottish Government, where they are also have taken them to court over a malicious prosecution. So that he was quite at pains to say that we can't talk any more about the actual case themselves. However, what we have here just now is the most senior law officer in the country, the Chief Constable, senior politicians, and Rangers Football Club, all gathered together in what seems to be some sort of conspiracy. Now, what none of us can figure out is who it is that's behind this conspiracy and what it was they were hoping to achieve. A look at Lord Mulholland's background would suggest that he probably didn't go to the East Enclosure terribly often as a boy. But at the same time, we don't know whether this is specifically about him or some of his team, or is it senior policemen. But whatever is there is very, very strange indeed, very, very strange indeed, and almost unheard of. It should now drop from the public eye a little bit, but we've elections in May, and politicians have already made some hay with this, and I suspect some will try and make more, because there's clearly more to this than we're hearing just now. It's a very, very strange thing to have done. As a support, as I said, it's not going to change anything. It's frankly annoying when you see the sums of money these people were awarded. I think £20 million plus expenses is what's been spoken about. That comes out of our pocket. That comes out of the taxpayers' pocket. So if nothing else, we should be angry about that. But for once, it looks like we might get clarity on this. There is now talk of a public inquiry. Lord Mulholland, the previous Lord Advocate, has more or less said that he is in favour of a public inquiry. He released a statement which was reported this morning, where he has distanced himself from some of the allegations that have been made. But I do feel that we are going to get some clarity on this eventually. And I think that can only be a good thing, because so much of that time was so opaque, Ross. So much went on, you just couldn't figure it out as supporters. And if this helps throw some light on it, and from what I can gather, the Duff and Phelps too are quite keen to have their say and make this public, then I think that would be in all our interests. Yeah.
Well, look, as you say, this is not going to end up with Rangers being awarded titles that we might have won over the last decade had we not gone through those trials. But I think that the best that we can hope for as fans now is to try and make sense of what actually happened. And you often get people making comments like this would make an incredible book or an incredible movie just about what went on, but I don't think anyone actually knows enough about what truly happened yet. And we have to believe that it will all come out in the wash one day. And as you say, so I have some legal knowledge and background from education and work, and it is truly astonishing, actually, for the events of admitting the malicious prosecution or suggesting a malicious prosecution, the retort from Lord Mulholland saying he wants this to be all out in the public domain, and that it's scandalous, false statements that have been made. It's a really, really interesting turn of events, and as you say, actually, yourself made a very, very good point through the week in the WhatsApp group that the money that this is costing the public in Scotland could have funded a hospital wing, or could have been used for this, could have been used for that, in a time when public funds are going to be stretched like no other for probably the next decade, because of what we're all living through at the moment. It's a really, really fascinating and at the same time still very, very sad state of affairs that this is where we've got ourselves, and all over football and a football club. So yeah, look, I think that's a very, very neat and concise summary of where we got to. I mean, as a fan, what do you hope for to come from all of this?
I'd love to see the truth come out. I would love to see, look, what was the purpose of this? Was this, was this an attempt to embarrass so a club that was struggling to some mud our way? Was this? I'd love. These are people who should certainly be above, frankly, petty football allegiances. It's one thing supporting a club, but it's another thing, bringing that into your professional life and clouding your judgment on things that, frankly, they shouldn't be. So I think overall, I would love to see some clarity come out of this, because I think an awful lot of people took an awful lot of pleasure out of what happened to us as a club, and a number of people, again, if you look at the actual tax bill now, that's a tax bill that our club could have paid. We would have had a few difficult seasons, we'd have had to sell a few players. That's a tax bill our club could have paid. And that's forgotten now.
Yeah.
And everything that happened to us stemmed from that. And so, yeah, I would like to see some clarity on this, because that's a difficult period in our history, and we have to own it. We do own it. I don't know a Rangers supporter who shies away from that, but it would be nice to just get some clarity on that, because there was a few folk danced on us when they had the chance, and I don't think they should have done that.
No. Well, look, I would say watch this space. I suspect you'll be watching a while, but maybe just check in every now and then on this space, and we'll see what happens. But I don't think this is going to go away, and I certainly the amount of money that this is going to cost, undoubtedly, in terms, as you say, the expenses and the compensation for every Celtic fan who said those taxes that you didn't pay. This is a scandal. Surely this is the scandal. So this is, you might shy away from this because it's complex, and because it's not very glamorous. It's the it's the legal intricacies of a tax prosecution. It's not easy to sell that in a tabloid. So that's a damning indictment, probably. And I don't mean to criticize any of the fine journalists that we've had on this show, but there's so many kind of sad and distressing elements to all of this that I think all we can do is hope that this all comes out in the wash. John, I think it is time that we actually start talking about some football.
Wow.
Talking about unpleasant stuff. I for one, I'm delighted to be back on the park tomorrow. Rangers at home against Kilmarnock.
Talking of unpleasant stuff, Kilmarnock.
Kilmarnock, who have gone through a very difficult season so far, and your friend and mine, David Wren, comes on the show a lot of the time, and very, very insightful. He obviously was a journalist in Kilmarnock for a number of years. Made a comment to me a couple of weeks ago that he felt that Kilmarnock, with the recruitment that they'd made, were sleepwalking towards relegation. And he, kind of been proven right. And if Hamilton and Ross County weren't so bad last week, as an exception, he may well have been proved absolutely right that Kilmarnock could have found themselves in a really, really distressing position. The first thing to ask, John, is that we approach this in a bit of a dilemma up front. Kamaru Roof, Alfredo Morelos, undoubtedly the two best strikers at the club, are suspended. Defoe perhaps back to full fitness, perhaps not. We're not quite sure. How do you approach the striker position tomorrow?
Well, I think Eaton is playing up front. I thought it was interesting, Gerrard's comments today. He was talking up Eaton. He was suggesting that he had a better game than perhaps most supporters gave him credit for. But to be fair, very few of them got pass marks last weekend. So I suspect Eaton will start. I think the challenge is getting support to him. I think that will be the big challenge. I don't think Defoe will start. I don't think Defoe can be match fit. I would be surprised if Defoe starts. I suspect he'll be on the bench, but he hasn't played. Has he played any football since the turn of the year? I can't remember.
No.
So he's definitely not match fit. So I would be surprised if he starts. I suspect it will be Eaton with Kent and another off him. The problem they had the other day was that they weren't getting close enough to Eaton, and when the ball was coming up to him, it wasn't sticking. He wasn't finding anyone to give it to. Yeah,
I actually thought Eaton did pretty well last week. Personally, I thought that he was winning a lot of balls and then not a lot happened because he didn't. So you've mentioned you suspect it'll be Eaton with Ryan Kent just off, and Ryan Kent has been singled out for a lot of criticism from supporters over the last couple of weeks. And personally, I think that a lot of that's been warranted. And I know that as a winger, you're naturally going to blow hot and cold, and certainly playing in the Scottish Premier League, you're unlikely to find a winger who gives a 9 out of 10 every week. Do you think that there's any chance that Gerrard will kind of listen to that growing call from the support for Ryan Kent to maybe take a wee break?
No, none at all. No, I don't think. Kent, rightly or wrongly, Kent's with McGregor and Tav and Goldson is a stick-on. Mm-hmm. I think Kent would have to steal Gerrard's car. I think he would have to do something seriously wrong not to get in that team just now. I agree. His form hasn't been great. He's not the only one, but his form hasn't been to the level that we would expect. But he's there to do a job. He works hard. Even when he's not playing well, he does work hard. He does. He tracks back. He does those types of things. But Kent is there to create. Kent is there as for his speed and his directness, for his crossing, and that's the side of his game that hasn't been as strong as perhaps we would like it. I always feel Kent's a kind of big game player. I always think Kent's the kind of guy. Kent likes the Old Firm games. Kent likes European games.
Yeah.
I always feel that's where you see Kent at his best. And Hamilton away in February isn't his.
I would actually support Ryan Kent being dropped to the bench for a game. Maybe bring in Scott Wright and see what he can do. We still have Greg Stewart, as far as I'm aware. Somewhere. You never is the one player who never seemed to find his way to the exit door. Gordon Jones goes to Sunderland and Greg Stewart goes to Auchenhowie. Hadji with Aribo. I feel there's options, and Kent shouldn't be untouchable given the performances that I do think he's put in the last few weeks. Yeah. Now, obviously, last week I think was probably our weakest performance. You could maybe talk about Livingston earlier on in the season or St Mirren in the Cup. I actually think last week was probably worse, and we were lucky to get a point. If you're Steven Gerrard with this group of players, who obviously had a bit of a collapse last season after the winter break, how do you?
I would hope this week there was some very clear focus made that the job is not done. That yes, they're in a strongly good position, but the job's not done. They haven't completed it yet, and it has to be completed. And I would hope that that's what's been getting put through to them. We're at home. The pitch is not going to be good tomorrow, Ross. The weather in Glasgow's been rotten this week. It's been barely got above freezing. We got a lot of snow at the start. So the pitch will be wet. Are kind of fluid best, because I don't think we've been playing on wonderful pitches. The pitch is probably not going to be great tomorrow. Kilmarnock, I suspect Kilmarnock are going to make life difficult for us, and so I think the work that the coaching team will have done this week will be reinforcing that. The hairdryer stuff, I think that's best for half time. I don't think you do that through the week. Through the week, you build the players up. I don't think modern players react to that in the same way that perhaps they did 20 years ago. But that's normal. There are guys there who perhaps aren't seeing their kids. There'll be guys there who won't have seen, particularly guys like Kent. Guys who aren't from Glasgow or from the west of Scotland. I don't know his background. I don't know his family, but I don't imagine he's seen much of them. For the last.
Really changed for us when we brought on Davis and Ryan Jack. Would you expect to see the two of them starting tomorrow? And do you think that maybe Zungu in particular has kind of blown a chance at a longer contract at Rangers?
Yes. I don't think Zungu's going to be here after the summer. He looks like a tidy player, but he's not a replacement for any of those three. You're judging the guy on, a couple of starts and a few substitute appearances. But from what I've seen, no, he hasn't looked like that to me. After the St Mirren Cup game, when we lost, I remember on Gersnet the next day on Gersnet saying that, what we learned from that was that whatever game it is, any two from Kamara, Davis or Jack have to start. Because we need at least two of them. And I think in a game against a team like Kilmarnock who're going to sit back, two of them is fine. I would be very surprised if it's not Jack and Davis. I'd be very surprised if Jack and Davis are two sitting midfielders tomorrow. And I think on balance, because of Kamara, I think Kamara's had quite a few games recently, Ross. I think Kamara, wasn't at his best last week. That said, he was absolutely brilliant a couple of weeks ago. I think it was the Hibs game. He was immense. So I'm certainly not for bombing them out, but I suspect that those two will start. I think if they're both fit, they'll start.
Yeah, you're just backing me up. Glenn Kamara, a big game player. Hibs. I mean, Hibs is a bigger game than Hamilton anyway, I'd say. And now if we actually start to think about Kilmarnock themselves, they get rid of Alex Dyer and quite sharply bring in Tommy Wright, who, very, very successful by St Johnstone's standards, winning the Scottish Cup there in 2014. And actually, I think not a bad fit for a Kilmarnock side that's struggling. I think he'll get some discipline into them, but they didn't have the best of starts midweek, struggling against Motherwell. What do you expect him to kind of bring that might change Kilmarnock compared to how we've seen them? I mean, I always think with Kilmarnock, they recruited badly. I don't think that's in doubt. They haven't brought in excellent players. They've got a couple of players who can hurt teams. Chris Burke still hurting teams. Nicky Kabamba scores a fair number of goals. They got rid of Eamon Brophy, which I thought was a real surprise, because I thought he was probably their most dangerous player. But I think the recruitment's been poor, and they've had a lack of discipline and a lack of solidity. Do you think that that's the kind of thing that Tommy Wright might be able to fix?
Yes, Wright is... Well, you can only judge him what he did at St Johnstone. He made St Johnstone a very hard team to beat. He doesn't play pretty football. No. I actually don't think he's a long-term solution for Kilmarnock. I actually don't think the Kilmarnock support want Steve Clarke.
Yeah.
The Kilmarnock support want that. They want somebody who gives them some hope. I don't think they have great expectations of winning the league or winning the cup. I think they are realistic about that. They would like to be entertained. I don't think Tommy Wright's an entertainer. He's a pragmatist. And to be fair, in their current position, they're only 1 point ahead of Ross County. So they could go second bottom tomorrow, depending how other results go. But they've lost 5 in a row. They're in terrible form. This is the kind of game. It's a free hit for Tommy Wright. It's a free hit for Kilmarnock. I expect, it's 10-man defence. It's try and hit us in the break. Try and do something with set pieces. That's what Kilmarnock will be doing. We need to break Kilmarnock down early. We need to be patient if we don't. We need to keep moving that ball. We need to be tiring them out, because he will have spent this week working on defensive discipline. He will have spent this week working on that, trying to solidify a team that's been conceding goals. And I think that is the challenge. I mean, they don't score goals either, but a new manager comes in. They've had 2 bad results: lost to St Mirren and then lost to Motherwell. And Motherwell are kind of down there with them, so that was a bad result for them. But we've seen this before. Hamilton last week. Hamilton, dead and buried. We all thought. Certainties to go down this season. They looked pretty good to me last week.
Yeah.
So teams can raise their game when they play Rangers.
And you say that you expect 10-man defence, and I completely agree. Do you have a bit of confidence that we've got better at dealing with that this season than maybe the last 2 or 3 years?
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah. We've more guile in our team, without a doubt. We're going to miss Roof and Morelos tomorrow, because they're both players who bring guile. They're both guys who can win you a match. We will miss that tomorrow. But no, I mean, between, aside from the obvious guys like Hadji and Aribo and Kent, aside from them, you've got guys like Davis. Davis can open the defence anytime he wants. He's ability to do that. The fullbacks, our fullbacks are so important to us. And with Eaton playing, with Eaton's height, the right cross into the box will be important, because they'll have a big defence. They'll be looking to just, keep knocking it back out again. That'll be important. We'll get free kicks. We'll get set pieces. They'll be important. I do think we'll win fouls. Kilmarnock will be quite a physical team. Tommy Wright's teams tend to be quite physical. I suspect he's going to add that to them as well. Although I always felt they were quite physical under Dyer. I do think we've been better at it. You've seen that this season. We have been better at it. Pitch isn't going to suit us tomorrow. Weather's supposed to be okay. Cold, but I'm expecting a kind of war of attrition, I'm afraid.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. A war of attrition is a good way to put it. And pitch may not be the best, but at least it's grass and it's not rugby park, where thankfully we don't have to go again this season.
Yeah.
Well, John, I think that probably certainly brings us to the end of all the questions that I'd had written out. And at 49 minutes, that's quite a long preview show, but I think we'll probably have to wrap that one up there. So what I'll say is a massive thank you as always to John for joining us tonight and bringing his insight on some fairly meaty and difficult topics. The show will be back on Sunday night with both myself and John, and our good friend David Wren will be hosting that one. So please do join us then. That's Sunday at 9:30. As always, it's here live on YouTube and will be available for download from Monday morning, wherever you get your podcasts. Do head over to the website at www.gersnet.co.uk to catch up on all the articles, all the previews, the friendly discussion forum, and please do check out our partners over at rangerspicks.com as well. The only other thing to say is we will see you on Sunday. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and enjoy the game tomorrow.